Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right into a huge question today, one that really gets to the heart of things. What does it actually mean to be spiritually mature? It's a question a lot of us have probably asked. What are the real signs of spiritual growth? Is it seeing miracles, having all this deep knowledge? Well, today we're going to dive into a specific framework from Apostle Michael Orokbo, and it might just flip what you think you know on its head. All right, so let's start with something that sounds like a total paradox. The source kicks things off by looking at the Corinthian church. Now, this place was on fire, spiritually speaking. I mean, prophecies, healings, miracles, they had it all. And yet, the Apostle Paul writes to them and basically says, "You're not spiritual, you're carnal." He's calling them babies. This right here, this contradiction, is the key to everything we're talking about today. And that brings us straight to our first big idea. And honestly, it's a game changer. It's this: gifts are not the same thing as growth. Just because you see the power doesn't mean you're seeing maturity. So you can see here, there's a really sharp line drawn in the sand. On one side, you've got all the flashy stuff, the prophecies, the miracles. Super powerful, yeah, but they can totally exist in someone who's, well, spiritually a toddler. Then on the other side, you've got maturity. And that's all about what's going on inside, your character. The source puts it bluntly: if spiritual maturity is a class, gifts aren't even on the syllabus. They're like an extracurricular activity. And get this, for an example, it really drives the point home. The source says you could literally be mentoring someone who raises the dead, and your job would be to sit them down and teach them about patience and kindness. Why? Because gifts and character are on two totally different tracks. So the takeaway is, don't be intimidated by someone with amazing gifts. Celebrate that for sure. But remember, the real blueprint for growth is something else entirely. Okay, so if the big, spectacular gifts aren't the measuring stick, then what is? Well, according to this framework, the real test of maturity is something a lot quieter. It's something that happens on the inside. And here it is. This is the absolute core of it all, the central pillar. Spiritual maturity isn't about what you can do. It's about your ability to discern the will of God and then actually align your life with it. It's about finding out what God wants and then doing it. And the ultimate example of this, Gethsemane. Think about it. In the face of just unimaginable suffering, the goal wasn't to escape. It was to align. Not my will, but yours. That moment becomes the gold standard for maturity, that surrender of your own will to a higher one. And this is so crucial. Without that core alignment, the source says you're basically still a child spiritually. You get tossed around by every new idea, every shiny opportunity, what this person thinks, what that person says, and because you're so unstable, you can't be trusted with real purpose, with what the source calls kingdom, real spiritual authority and responsibility. So this really brings the question home to you and me, right? When we look at our own lives, our careers, our relationships, are we making choices based on that intentional alignment? Or are we just kind of wandering through whatever door happens to be open? It's a tough question, but man, it's an important one. Okay, but to get to that place of alignment, it requires a total shift in how you see reality. It's not a small tweak. It's like swapping out the entire operating system of your life. So you've got these two ways of living. Most of us, let's be honest, live by what our senses tell us. We see the bank account is empty, and we say, well, that's the fact. That's reality. But the spiritually mature, the elders as they're called here, they operate on a different system. They're controlled by what God says. So for them, a bad report or an empty bank account isn't the end of the story. It's actually the perfect setup for a miracle. The story of Lazarus is the perfect example of this. I mean, the fact was the man was dead. 4 days dead. You can't get more factual than that. But Jesus just completely reframes it. He basically says, this fact isn't a tragedy. It's a stage. It's an opportunity for faith to show up and for God to get the glory. It really hammers home that idea. You have to believe first, and then you'll see. So what happens when you start living this way, by faith instead of by facts? Well, your whole world gets turned upside down. You start operating on a wisdom, a logic that looks like complete nonsense to everyone else. Let's talk about money. The world system says, get as much as you can and hold on to it tight, right? But this other wisdom, the kingdom system, it's the complete opposite. It says you actually prosper by giving it away. You scatter and you increase. These two ideas are they're polar opposites. You have to pick one. And it's the exact same thing with love. The world's way,
It's a deal. It's transactional. Nothing goes for nothing, right? I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. But in the kingdom system, everything goes for nothing. Love isn't a transaction, it's a gift. It comes from a place of pure compassion, no strings attached.
And the source doesn't pull any punches here. It says if you give someone something and then you expect them to make decisions based on that gift, that's not love. That's manipulation. It literally calls it witchcraft. Wow. Because true love, real love, sets people free. It doesn't try to control them. Okay, so this all sounds great, but how do you actually build this kind of character? How does this happen in real life? Well, the source gets super practical and lays out an internal process. It's this idea of suffering in the flesh. And no, we're not talking about physical pain. This is all about emotional self-control. Picture this. Someone says something that just gets under your skin. Your first impulse is to fire back, right? To defend yourself. But instead, you make a choice to hold your tongue, to stay quiet. According to the source, that energy, that anger or frustration, it doesn't just vanish. It gets turned inward, and it actually forges something new in you. Real, powerful self-control. And when you start mastering those impulses, you develop this incredible quality called forbearance. What is it? It's basically the capacity to put up with other people's junk, their mistakes, their imperfections, and to do it lovingly. It's about building people up, even when you have to correct them, instead of tearing them down. And the source uses such a perfect, down-to-earth example for this. Think about it. A marriage doesn't end because someone squeezed the toothpaste from the middle of the tube. That's not the real issue. The marriage ends because of an absence of forbearance. It's the little things, right? It's in those tiny daily moments that we either choose to endure each other's flaws with love, or we let them chip away at the relationship. And when you live this way, look at the results. These are the fruits of real maturity. You get faithfulness, being dependable because you love someone, not because you're getting paid. You get kindness, words that actually build people up instead of crushing their spirit. And maybe biggest of all, you get freedom. You're no longer a slave to what other people think of you because your anchor is somewhere so much deeper. And that brings us to our final and maybe most challenging thought. The source brings up the story of King Saul. God gave him a very specific instruction, but the people wanted something else, and Saul caved. He chose to please the crowd instead of obeying God. And in that one moment, by choosing popular approval over divine alignment, he lost everything. It's such a powerful warning, isn't it? The real test of your maturity might not come when you're facing your enemies, but when you're surrounded by your friends. So the question is, what will you choose?